Okay, so welcome everyone to another of our webinar on this beautiful October evening. We're so happy to have you join us today for another European Specialty Tea Association webinar to learn, connect, and inspire tea professionals everywhere. I'm Bernadine Tay, one of the founding directors of ESTA, along with my colleagues Alexis Kay, and also a founding director, and David Veal, the executive director.
Hello.
Now, as an association, we always support all champions of specialty tea, and we aim to deliver all the help we can to help all of us thrive in this tough economic landscape. And today we have John Cooper. He is the founder of Pico Tea based in Edinburgh. Established in 2008, John will be sharing his insights along with his journey, sharing his knowledge on the key ideas on how tea businesses can help find their unique selling point. Now, I'd love to give you the chance to ask John questions, and you can do this by posting them in the Q&A box anytime during the session, and we'll do our best to address your questions at the end. But so for the next 35 to 40 minutes, sit back, relax, and sip some tea. Welcome, John. It's a pleasure to have you here today. But before we begin our presentation, I'd like to ask you a question we ask all of our presenters. What does specialty means to you, and how do you define it?
It's a very difficult question, as you know. I had to think about this when you put it to me to think about overnight, and I have split my answer into two. I have my personal feelings about specialty tea and what it means to me on a personal level, and then I have my commercial hat on about what it means from a commercial sense. From a personal, emotional well-being point of view, it is about sharing and culture and bringing people together, and about knowledge and all these different fascinating things and going on a journey. That is absolutely what specialty tea is for me. I have to also make sure that I mention that specialty tea should be more than just tea. It's infusions as well. So we have to talk about infusions which come under the banner. So there's a lot of hand harvested and very specialist things like camomiles and peppermints and mints around. But from a commercial point of view, specialty tea also has to encompass pyramid tea bags and flavored teas as well. It's anything which isn't really your supermarket tea bag, which is a step up from that. So I know ESTA has its own definition of specialty tea, which is very broad, but it's such a difficult thing to define. But definitely, commercial point of view, it's got to be large leaf teas, pyramid tea bags, infusions, herbal infusions, and flavored teas. And then in my personal thing, it's about the journey and the culture and the learning and the people.
That's a beautiful description. Couldn't agree with you more. It's something that's very difficult to define, and there's no right or wrong answers, but we love hearing from everybody, on what their take is. So thank you for that, John. Now with that, I'm going to let you take the floor. Sure. And share your insights with everybody. And after that, we'll give you the questions, okay, from the floor.
So just give me 1 second to share my screen.
Yeah, certainly.
Get this running. Okay. Right, can everybody see that? Can you see that?
Yes, yes.
Perfect. Okay. Right. So, hi, I'm John. I am one of the founders of Pico Tea. I am in my tea studio in Leith tonight, as not to be disturbed by my 3.5-year-old who is doing his bedtime right now. I am delighted to have been invited to give this webinar about finding a unique selling point in tea. Unique selling point, also known as your value proposition, I suppose, if you want to go into business speak. I would like to open a debate and a discussion through my webinar. I'm not saying that everything I say is gospel. This is just through my experiences. And I think it'll be absolutely brilliant to find out what people's points of view are afterwards, and any questions that they might have. Just go to my next slide. So a little bit about me. that is me, age 22, in Shanghai tea house, doing the tourist thing when I first went to China to learn about tea. A bit less gray hair than I have now. I started dealing tea in 2005. My background is not in tea. My background was in engineering. And through a bit of a roundabout way, I got into dealing in tea. Just to qualify that, I knew absolutely nothing about specialty tea when I started. And everything I know now is through working in the tea industry over the past 17 years and working really hard and making just about every single mistake under the sun. So when I started in 2005, I'd been to China to source tea. I opened a small tea shop in Edinburgh and then a licensed tea bar. I was very inexperienced with what I was doing. To cut a long story short, it didn't work as such, but I learned a huge amount about the hospitality industry and how tea is served, and margins and customer experience and what customers are looking for. And I have used that over the years as the base level for what I still do now. But what I was able to do is I was to salvage part of my business after the tea bar didn't work. In 2008, I was able to salvage it, and I started Pico Tea and went back to basics, which was in dealing in tea proper, and built the business up from there over the past 12 years or so. During that time, we had a second shop, and then we closed the second shop, and then we opened a warehouse, and then we moved to a bigger warehouse. And then in 2018, we were in a position to open a larger warehouse with a factory in it. And I started the company Adventures in Tea, which effectively is a sister company to Pico Tea. It runs alongside. It manufactures all the blends, makes all the pyramid tea bags, does all the packing for Pico Tea, but there is a lot of spare capacity. So we use that spare capacity in our salsa warehouse to co-pack for other companies, blend for other companies as well. And using the experiences that we've got, we help other companies with their tea. A little bit quickly about the scope of this webinar. My experience and my expertise is in the UK tea industry. Some of what I'm going to say probably can be applied elsewhere in the world, but specifically my experiences here. I think for all that the UK talks about being a nation of tea drinkers, really when you actually look at what that means, we drink a lot of supermarket tea bags rather than loose leaf tea. So it's quite interesting how I'm going to apply the webinar throughout. It also takes into account independent specialty tea brands, and I've put a couple of caveats in here. So it's related to specialty tea under the ESTA definition, which you can get on the ESTA website. It's a very broad definition of specialty tea, but is predominantly for Camellia sinensis based products. But we can't talk about specialty tea as an industry without taking into account herbal infusions as well. Everybody who deals in specialty tea has some herbal infusions or flavored teas in their range pretty much. So we can't ignore it, and we have to include that in the scope. And it's also for loose leaf and pyramid tea bag formats, which make up a big chunk of what is classed as a specialty tea industry. What this doesn't include, and this is what I want to be quite clear about, is mass available non-independent tea brands such as Twinings and Teapigs. Finding a unique selling point when you're a small to medium-sized tea company requires a lot of ingenuity and a lot of kind of creativity. But if you have a marketing budget as big as Twinings or Teapigs, where you can use brute force to go through into the market, then my webinar doesn't really apply. As well as not applying to larger companies such as Jing Tea, and I suppose Whittards could fit in as well, because they are large companies. Jing Tea is no longer an independent tea company. It's owned by a PLC, which owns some of the tea estates in Darjeeling. So that's why I've kind of excluded that from the scope. So to start with, dealing in tea is not easy. When people come to me and ask me for advice on how to start a tea company, or what I would suggest if they want to start a tea company, I ask them these questions. These are really, really important questions. And the first one, and it always has to be asked, is, do I need to make a living from this? When do I need to make a living from this? So how long am I willing to stick it out before I can make a living from this? Am I happy owning a small shop in a town weighing out tea? What I mean by that is, if you have identified that there's a local market to be a tea shop and weigh out tea in your local area and supply your local people and make money from that, then that's great. But if you want to be nationally recognized, or do you want to sell online, have you really thought about how are you going to stand out? And unfortunately, without me sounding too negative, what tends to happen is that when I ask people, do you need to make a living from this? And if they say yes, well, what's your cash, what cash buffer do you have? And what's your burn through rate on the cash? If you've got 3 months or 4 months before they need to turn a profit, I unfortunately have to say to them, I don't think this is the industry for you. Unless you have a huge amount of cash from the outset to get your marketing right. And even then, it's a very, very difficult product to sell enough of to make a profit in a very short period of time. To talk about dealing in tea is not easy. Here is a little bit of what I see, how the growth of the specialty tea industry in the UK has changed since I started in 2005. So going back to 2004. As far as I can see from my experiences, Jing Tea was one of the pioneers of specialty tea as it stands now, with all the smaller companies in the marketplace. They set up their website in 2004, and one of the first companies to properly market tea with this idea of it being high-end, different from what was already available on the market. Specialty tea was seen as Twinings, but Jing Tea came along and set themselves up with the tagline "Defining Tea." It was very clever, and they got their story right from the beginning, which has stayed with them all the way through to today. And it's made them one of the most known internationally of British specialty tea companies. Their range was curated from the start, and it was different from what's available. When I started in 2005, just having a big range of tea was a USP in its own right, because you just couldn't get these teas from around the world. It was difficult to source them. But as time went on and these have become more ubiquitous and more available, for example, Jasmine Dragon Pearls were quite a thing back in 2005. Now everybody has them in their range. But now I would say that it's not really a USP in its own right to have a large range. Hospitality wasn't interested in loose leaf tea. The number of times that I would go out for a very expensive meal, and at the end of the meal, you'd ask for the tea selection, and they'd bring you a list of Twinings double chambered tea bags, and that was that was as much as they wanted to offer you. The number of doors that were slammed in my face because of this was a real issue, and it was really depressing at the time. So things have changed over a period of time, but the argument from hospitality was, well, our customers are not demanding this stuff, so therefore why should we change what we're doing? London was and still is ahead of the game. I think the way things changed in London was quite exceptional. I think loose leaf tea started to make its way into hospitality a lot sooner than, say, up here in Edinburgh. Edinburgh is around 5 years behind the rest of the UK. But I still think that London is in a bit of a bubble. There's a lot of tea companies in London who don't seem to understand that further afield, the attitude is different to specialty tea, and that we have to not be too snobby about what we expect people to drink, and what we can charge. Up in Edinburgh, we have the Waldorf Astoria. I was chatting to them just the other day. They charge £50 for an afternoon tea, and that's at the absolute top of what you can get away charging in Scotland. But whilst in London, you can charge £95 plus, and you can have a range of teas which is purely single estate, you would not last 5 minutes trying to do that in Edinburgh. Things started to change in 2010. Moving forwards, I think when the third wave coffee movement started, this made a big difference as coffee roasters started to buy into the idea of specialty tea, and the coffee shop started to do things, and it's moved on from there. But now, as more and more people have loose leaf tea, I think what's become the most important thing now is not just having loose leaf tea on your menu, it's about the customer experience as a whole, from the start to the finish. It's about how it's served, it's about the knowledge, it's about the training, everything that goes with it. So why do people go into dealing in tea if it's such a difficult thing to make money in? And on paper, it looks very attractive. It's got a high gross profit. The B2C margin in a lot of places is 70%, 80%. The hospitality margin is 90% plus. It seems like there are low startup costs. You can go and you can buy from a catalog in Germany and have a range of 10 teas for less than £200 or £300. There's a perception that it's a very easy product to understand because everybody drinks tea. The market research, just looking at the UK Teas and Infusions Association website itself, talks about over 100 million cups of tea being consumed in the UK every day. So of course, if you're new to tea and you're thinking, oh, I'm thinking of what I want to do with my life and I want to start a tea company, it's a no-brainer, because it looks like if I can just get that little tiny percentage of that massive market, £650 million or whatever it happens to be annually, then you're going to do well. And the number of pitches, including my own a few years ago, which have included the over 100 million cups of tea being consumed in the UK, or tea is the most consumed beverage in the world, second only to water, to try and raise funds and trying to persuade people that this is a brilliant product to deal in. But the reality is much different. Most of the 100 million cups of tea that are drunk each day in the UK are supermarket tea bags. And this is really important to understand, that the average person in the street is still not completely switched on to the idea of loose leaf tea. So I like to also use the comparison with coffee roasting for why it's financially difficult to deal in tea. So if you're a coffee roaster and you're starting up, you can run a coffee roastery on 4 products. And your main one is probably going to be your espresso blend. If you get 1 or 2 really busy cafes, you're probably going to be selling into them at least 30 kilos of espresso a week, because double espresso uses around 18 grams of coffee per serving, plus all the dialing in and all the wastage and everything that goes with it. So they just fly through the coffee. But the same cafe, and I'm being generous here, and this is through my own experience of selling into some very busy places, same cafe might only go through 5 kilos of tea a week, or breakfast blend a week. If you think that the average wholesale price into hospitality of breakfast tea is around £20 a kilo, plus or minus £5, and espresso is about the same, with the same gross profit and cash margin, then you need to have 6 times as many wholesale customers in hospitality as a coffee roaster. So this is why the coffee roasters are growing rapidly, and they do really well. I see coffee roasters setting up everywhere in Edinburgh, and I look at them and I think, wow, you're growing fast. And it's because we have to work 6 times as hard in the tea industry just to make the same amount of money. And this is a really important thing that I think a lot of people don't realize. A small amount of tea makes a lot of infusion, and this is the reason being. But there's also another issue here, is that a coffee roaster can start with 4 products, which they can buy the green beans from somebody like the Macanta coffee importers. They can get a hand-to-mouth supply, and they get the margins on it. They can start with an espresso, a decaf, and maybe 2 single estates, which they can rotate frequently. If you're a tea company and you're wanting to break in, particularly if somewhere is already stocking a different tea brand or is using tea bags, immediately you need to have a range of at least 10. You've got to have your breakfast, your decaf, your Earl Grey, your rooibos, your fruit blend, your peppermint, your chamomile, the one that you were already buying from the company that they got, the one that their friend likes, and something a bit different. So you have 10 SKUs or products needed immediately, just before you've even got started. And there are minimum order requirements if you're going to buy the product from particular sources in order to get them cheaply enough to make the margin or to compete against the person who's already established. So you have a problem. where you're holding a lot of stock, which is moving slowly, and you've got to get 6 times as many customers in selling in hospitality. Now, of course, I'm not talking about retail here, because in retail it's a bit different, but there are other reasons why retail is difficult to get into. In order to get into retail, there's a lot of unrealistic expectations of how much it costs to enter the market. You've got to have a range of teas. You've got to get really good brand design to stand out. You've got to have your packaging costs. The number of people who come to me who want us to do co-packing for them, who haven't costed in that they have to pay somebody else to pack their tea if they're going to upscale, because they haven't costed in their own labor. And this is a real problem, because a lot of loose leaf teas or single estate teas or flavored teas are large leaf and don't go through automatic machinery very well. Some of them do, but a lot of them don't. They get stuck or they de-blend as you go along. So it means that a lot of the stuff still has to be packed by hand, and we have to take this into account when we're looking at the cost. And then is the turnover stock, as I've already talked about. But fundamentally, there is still low customer engagement in the tea market. And the market currently in the UK, as far as I'm concerned, is pretty saturated. And then going on from there, there is a lack of unique selling point. And I'm going to talk about this in a bit more detail just now about what I mean by lack of USP. So finding a unique USP. So for those of you who don't know what USP is, it's unique selling point. So it's something which makes your brand stand out from the next brand. We'll start by asking the question, is the UK specialty tea market saturated? Well, the current Mintel report from 2021 is depressing reading, because the answer in the UK is yes. Black tea drinking and tea drinking as a whole is declining faster than the growth of specialty and fruit and herbal tea drinking. And this is a real problem, that by weight, that the market is declining. Now by volume, by price sales, by money sales, it's growing because of inflation. So the amount of money being generated in the tea industry is growing, but the amount of actual physical tea that's being consumed is less. Young people are switching off to it. They're moving away to coffee, they're moving away to cold drinks. And I do have some ideas as to why this might be within the tea industry. But also, if you're setting up in the tea industry and you want somebody to switch from what they're currently drinking to you, then the reasons why they might want to change are, as I've listed here, that your product is environmentally friendly, that you're ethical, price point possibly, and then your flavor combinations. But then the Mintel report goes on to say that 72% of tea drinkers won't change to another brand because they're happy with what they have. So it makes it very difficult to give that impetus to try and get somebody to buy your product over the one that they're already drinking, particularly if it's a mass market specialty tea, which has got brute force marketing. And one of the reasons why it is so difficult to find a unique selling point in tea is the tea supply chain itself. And this is what I firmly believe. The tea supply chain is the fundamental problem as to why it is so hard to find a unique selling point. And it's the lack of transparency, and it's the lack of honesty within the supply chain of what you're actually selling to the customer that is causing the customer to switch off, because they don't feel there's no stake. The customers I speak to don't feel like they've got a real stake in the supply of the product. They have a stake in the brand they buy because they trust a brand. But do they actually know what it is they're consuming, other than the tick box ethics and environmentally friendly aspect of it, or whether it's organic or not? And this comes back to the fact that as a tea company entering into the market, or a small tea company that's already established, it's very difficult to buy small amounts of tea directly from source. So the tea is then traded through third parties, but nobody wants to admit that they buy their teas from third parties, because it kind of undermines the romanticism of the fact that you started your tea company in the first place. So, but if you want to have your 10 SKUs that you need to have in order to satisfy your first lot of demand, buying 10 SKUs direct when there are minimum quantities of, say, 1 sack of tea, you end up with, say, 250 kilos of tea straight away. That's a lot of tea to shift if you are new to the market. There are growers who have now set up When I started in 2005, there was no such thing as Facebook. There was no such thing as WhatsApp and Messenger and Instagram and growers who can contact you directly. But now there are growers who can do this, which is great. There are some in China, there's some in Japan, there's some in India, and all around the place who are willing to sell smallish quantities. But the problem is the number of people who are doing this and the names of their estates, they're known and they're finite. So we end up with multiple tea companies in the online tea trading space, which is where the most popular place to trade is, selling the same product, but not willing to disclose who their supplier is, or changing the name of the supplier, or fibbing slightly about who the supplier is in order to try and get that unique selling point over the next person. But because these small growers don't know what the market's like in the West, they need to make a living, and these teas are not cheap. We're talking sometimes upwards of £200 a kilo cost price. And they make 40, 50 kilos per batch. That's a lot of tea of one particular tea to buy. They have started selling their teas direct to consumer through their websites. And the tea aficionados and geeks are happy to buy the teas directly and wait for it to arrive, then go to the brands that they've got in the UK. So we're in a situation where we're all competing against each other with a product, which is the same product without a unique selling point. And it's a real issue. Same comes for flavored teas. Up until past, I don't know, 5 years or so, just about every single flavored tea in the UK market came either from Metropolitan Tea, Deathless and Bock, House and Leon, Vollenhaupt, one of these companies where you could buy a catalog, or you get the catalogs and you could just choose, and it was so easy. I'll have this one, this one, this one, this one, this one, and I'll have a range of flavored teas. But the problem is that there's nothing to stop the guy down the road buying the same tea. And then when you go to try and get into the market and get a customer in hospitality, the question that's asked you, well, why is your tea different from the guy down the road who I'm already buying from? And that's a real question, that actually something for you to think about. So we have this problem where the supply chain itself becomes the unique selling point. But as the supply chain has opened up, and more people enter the market, it stops being a unique selling point now. And there's a scrabble to kind of latch onto something. So I asked the question, so where am I adding value to my tea? And this is where I have some ideas from my experience of doing tea for however many years and the people who I speak to. And it's not just from the product itself. So talk about finding your value proposition. And we have to ask ourselves the question, how am I adding value? So we are effectively selling someone else's product most of the time, unless we are manufacturing. There are tea companies who are manufacturing, which is brilliant, but there's a lot of tea companies who don't have the infrastructure or the budget to be able to manufacture their own flavored blends particularly. So I always say, if you're going to sell tea, don't just think you're going to make a quick buck and that you can find the next crazy idea with added this and added that and put it into packet and I will make money out of it. If you're not passionate about the product, I turn down customers who come to me for custom blending who just couldn't give two hoots about tea, but just think that they're going to make money. I say to them, I don't think we're the right company to work with. You have to be passionate. You have to be honest, and you have to be transparent. It might cost you a sale in the first instant, but that trust that you build up in the tea industry and in the hospitality industry as a whole, particularly, and then in the retail industry as well, stands you in good stead, and people will come back to you. And it takes time. That's why I say with tea, if you need to make money straight away, then maybe it's not the product for you. It takes upwards of 2 to 5 years to get anywhere. Be knowledgeable about your product, but keep learning and developing your knowledge of tea. It takes a lifetime to be an expert in tea. So don't be arrogant. And when I say this, it's like being a tea master has to be bestowed on you. You cannot call yourself a tea master. I don't believe that that anyone really becomes a tea master, because there's always something to learn about tea. It's one of the most fascinating things about the product. It's what attracts me to the product. Every day is a learning day. I learn something new. Taking your customers on the journey with you is one of the best things you can do. And don't patronize your customers or be snobby about their choices. So outside of London is what I was saying, is that the number of tea companies that I come across who do not want to deal in flavored teas, who will only deal in single estate teas, and they will push really hard to get these on the menu. The trouble is that the general public are not ready for this. And if you start discrediting people's choices about what they want to drink, they will switch off to the product as a whole. And if they switch off to the product as a whole, they're going to start drinking something else. So you have to embrace the fact that some customers are not ready palate-wise or knowledge-wise, or even just everything that goes with it, to understand the idea of single estate Da Hong Pao or Yashya Xiang or Sencha or whatever. They might want to just have a fruity blend called Forest Fruits. And that's absolutely okay, because it's a stepping stone into them getting into the really high-end teas. Tell your story. Why did you get into tea in the first place? What was your reasoning for it? Did you create a range in a particular way because it means something to you? Don't just buy things out of the catalog and think that will do, and that's fine for me, because that's that. But if it tastes good and you think it's great and it's the best thing that you've ever had, fine, that's a brilliant thing to say to people. And then you can theme your range in a particular way. So one of the things that my company does is we talk about selling tea is about selling stories. So sell the story of the tea, how it ties into a particular thing. Your packaging could be different. That requires a bit of investment, but you could change the shape of your packaging. You could do something a bit different, but that requires time and effort. But the main thing is not to make untrue claims. But the main thing is the overall customer experience. Tea could be ancillary to other parts of your business. You could take your customers on your tea journey, and you have to give people exceptional customer service. And then finally, blending unique blends, which is something which I think is the future of tea, really, is blending. So I've got about 10 minutes left of the talk, and the next part, I want to talk about some of the bad behavior in the tea industry, which I personally believe is undermining those who actually do have genuine, real USPs. Then also a little bit about some external factors affecting the industry. And then at the end, about what we can all be doing together. And as I said, I hope it's going to open a bit of a debate and a discussion, which is what I think is the best thing that can happen in tea. So why do companies start making misleading claims about their tea? Why would you want to lie about your product? Because there are a huge number of people in the tea industry who are doing it. Sometimes it is a genuine lack of understanding of the product. But there's an issue with this. If you were to be selling any other product other than tea, just for example, you are making a sauce which was being supplied into Pret a Manger for their dairy-free wrap, and you ended up killing somebody, like happened, and you said, I didn't really understand the product, and so I put the labeling and I thought I was okay. This is not okay. So it's not an excuse to make claims about a product because you thought it was okay because someone else did it, or because it's a low-risk product, or something like this. It's so important that if you're going to sell any product, that you have a fundamental understanding of what that product is and what you are and aren't allowed to say. The next reason why people make misleading claims: lack of return on investment, weak sales, and no real USP. Now, this is an interesting thing, and I wasn't sure whether to include this little nugget in this webinar, but I think that as part of your market research, when you're looking to how you're doing in the industry or how others are doing in the industry, one brilliant thing that I would suggest you do is go in Companies House and look up all your competitors and look up their accounts and have a look at how they are actually doing, because you can see really clearly who's making money and who's not making money. And then the ones which you've got a niggling feeling at the back of your head that they're not quite above board with the ways in which they are promoting their product, you can kind of get an understanding that they've invested, in some cases, upwards of £1 million and not made a single penny in profit over a period of 5 to 10 years. So this is an issue. Going back to what I was saying about the real USP in tea. They don't want to put the effort into being passionate about the product, and they realized that they didn't do their market research first. They thought that branding was going to be enough. So the sales haven't matched up to what they thought they were going to get, and then they didn't have the real USP, and then they haven't made the money. So what do they end up doing? They end up fibbing about the product. And I have some examples. Now, I can talk about this openly now because it's out in the public domain, but it took a very long time before we were allowed to talk about it. But I would say that one of the biggest scandals that has happened in tea industry, probably across the world, but in the UK particularly, was what happened with the wee tea plantation. This is a guy who was supplying teas all over the world, some of which were served to Barack Obama, I think, as well, as Scottish grown tea, which turned out eventually, after scientific testing was done and there was a bit of an expose and investigation to it, that the tea was actually being bought from China or India or wherever and put into packets as Scottish grown. Now, the guy, Tam O'Brien, he started out genuinely dealing in Scottish tea. I believe that his tea was 100% Scottish tea when he started, but it didn't meet the expectations of what he needed to do in order to make it financially viable. So he started lying about what he was doing. And this is a real issue when it kind of undermines everybody else, and we're still reeling from it now with the lack of trust. It's growing now, and the Scottish tea industry has recovered and it's doing really well. But it's just absolutely shocking that somebody would think that they could get away doing this. And that's just one example. And if you get a chance to look for wee tea plantation fake tea on Google, you'll find all the articles about it and you can read about it in detail. Other things, claims about ingredients. Another one which came up in Scotland, which was particularly difficult, was the use of sea buckthorn in a product where it was said to be 100% Scottish sea buckthorn, and it turned out that the sea buckthorn was coming from Europe. So again, this idea of making claims about ingredients and their provenance is a real problem. But the other part I've said here is exclusivity. Claiming that you have bought 100% of a batch of tea from a particular place when you haven't. There are some companies in the UK who absolutely bend over backwards to buy 100% of a batch, or whether it's herbs or whether it's tea. And they are doing it legitimately. But there are those who just will say that they've bought an exclusive batch when they haven't. This next one is something which I find is really something which I find really tough, is claiming to have blended tea yourself when it's been bought from a catalogue. And this actually has legal implications, particularly since Brexit. There's this thing about Origin UK rules that we have to be careful about. If you want to say something that's made in the UK, you have to follow certain rules about how much effort has gone into blending it, whether it's been done with expertise. Buying a blend from, say, a catalogue and adding one ingredient to it doesn't mean you can change it to Origin UK. And then also, is that misleading to your customers? Is it misleading to the industry? By saying that you blended it when you haven't really changed the fundamental taste or flavor of the product. Labeling inaccuracies, this is a big one that is open to debate. Biodegradable versus compostable. If something is compostable, in my mind, it is that you can put it in your home compost. But if it's biodegradable, or if you say it's compostable, but it can only go in commercial composting, then is it actually compostable? And I think as an industry, we should be thinking about this. We should be thinking about the kind of claims that we make to everybody to figure out whether or not we should be saying something's compostable when it's not. I think it would boost consumer confidence. Not putting correct percentages on labels. This comes under another legal requirement of QUID rules, which I encourage everyone to look up and look at with percentages. This becomes important. I mean, it's a minor thing with certain flavored things. It becomes important if you are putting teas of origin into a blend. For example, if you are putting Dutch, Scottish, or English tea into a blend of teas, but not saying what percentage of tea you have put into it, then you're really misleading the customer. It could be 99.9% Assam and 0.1% Scottish tea or English tea or whichever. And the customer's not going to know what they're actually consuming. So it's really important that we think about these things. You might not be breaking the law exactly, or you might be on the edges of it. But if you're being misleading, you're being unethical and fundamentally undermining the unique selling point of everybody who is passionate and wanting to do things. And then the final part of this bit about bad behavior is this is quite an important one. It's pesticide residues and buying by post under the radar from China and Taiwan. Now, there are a lot of online tea companies who sell a very vast range of Chinese teas. And the problem is that there's a lot of teas from China which fall foul of the European regulations on pesticide residues. It's great when you get contacted by somebody on social media and they say, I want to sell you my tea from this particular garden, and you've not been to see them and you can't vet them, but you think this is going to be amazing. But you have to bear in mind that there are companies out there who are genuinely getting their teas tested, who are genuinely buying from people who are doing this legitimately. And the question that I put out there is it okay as an industry for us to be selling our unique selling point on the basis of something which is illegal and would also invalidate your product liability insurance if it was to be sent for testing? And it's a big question. And this is the whole debate that we should start about why tea is such a difficult thing to deal in. So external factors. I said in my pitch that I would talk about some preconceptions, some external factors, and one of these is preconceptions from hospitality, retail buyers, and coffee roasters. Somebody said to me once, tea is like toilet paper. You know you need to have it, but it's not a priority. This is hospitality buyers. This is hotels. This is why it's so difficult to sell into these places. We need to change the attitudes of hospitality. But in order to change the attitudes of hospitality, we need to show hospitality that is an important product to be dealing in. So we don't want to be dealing in like coffee, like companies who sell coffee, they will sell in their very expensive coffee machine, £10,000 handmade La Marzocco coffee machine. The coffee's been sorted months in advance. 2 days before opening, the cafe, restaurant, hotel contact you and say, oh, I need tea. Can you put me a menu in? Why is this? We need to think about why that is seen like this, and we need to work together as an industry to try and change this. But part of this is that tea is seen as a product that can be sourced without any skill. Coffee roasters perpetuate this in some cases. I have had coffee roasters saying to me, why should I buy tea from you? I can just buy it out of a catalog. I know where you buy your teas from. If I was going to sell tea, I would just buy it from a catalog and add it as an ancillary to my product. So we need to really raise our game. And this is something we need to do by going back to the unique selling points, finding unique selling points, being passionate, being honest and transparent. I personally feel that some of the large multinational tea companies have not worked with the small tea industry. Some ways there's been a bit of a closed shop. I think one thing about ESTA, which is brilliant, is that it's bringing together small to medium-sized tea companies who can share knowledge, and we can work together and not feel lonely and shut out from the rest of the industry. But finally, in this as well, being environmentally friendly has become a competitive issue rather than a moral issue. And this is something which I think it shouldn't be that your brand is better than the next brand because your packaging is environmentally friendly. So these kinds of things we need to share. I use the example of Volvo and the 3-point seatbelt. It was such an important innovation that it was shared widely amongst everyone. I'm seeing the time and I've got 2 more slides left. Second last slide, are awards good for specialty tea? And the question is yes. The answer to this question is yes, they are very good, but they need to be the right awards. And the two, there's 2 big ones in the UK. There's one that's just happened just last weekend, and then there's the Great Taste Awards, which are used by a lot of people to sell their products into independent farm shops and stuff. Great Taste Awards needs to be reformed. And during the Q&A, if anyone wants to ask me about why this should be, but I do think we should lobby the Great Taste Awards to work with ESTA particularly maybe, and the wider tea industry to try and change their judging criteria and their entry criteria, because at the minute it's a little bit all over the place. And I don't think what comes out in terms of the awards actually reflects the quality of the teas as an industry. Single origin competitions are great. I think there are a few international ones around which are brilliant, but if we're going to have ones in the UK, then we need to make sure that the judges are truly independent and are from all aspects of the industry, so we have a broad church. They should not be from one specific organization. And I firmly believe that there should be no monopoly. So to conclude, how can we all benefit and how can we all find a unique selling point, and how can we all grow this industry so that we're not fighting each other to steal each other's customers, but we're actually growing the market so that we are getting our teas into more places rather than shrinking it. I personally think, and this is a matter for debate, and Esther can have a think about it, I would like to see an informal code of conduct that we sign up to about what is not and what is okay and not okay, about the language around what we use to promote our products when it comes to environmental credentials, sourcing, blended myself, not blended myself, third parties, blended in the UK, all these kinds of things, just to make sure health benefits as well, so that we're all on a level playing field and that the consumer is fully informed honestly. I think it would increase trust in the industry, and I think we would all find that we could do really well out of it. Independent tea companies should be celebrated by the multinationals, not feared. Well, we can't change what the multinationals think, but I think if we get together and we lobby and we do things and we share and we become a force to be reckoned with, then maybe they will take notice. And then finally, and this is fundamental, we have to get over the situation and issue of ownership of tea. Not one person or organization has the right to own tea in any industry, in any, whether it's the UK, America, Europe. It should be open to all, and particularly with tea accreditation and education. So I'd like to see a really open playing field for everyone to come together, and I do believe that Esther is doing this. I'm seeing I've gone to 42 minutes for this, so it's the end of the webinar, but any questions I will happily answer, but I hope you found it informing, and I look forward to seeing what you all have to say.
Hi, John. Thank you very, very much for that. I think you can be rest assured that we found it very insightful. What an interesting and honest presentation. In fact, actually, you've got some really, really good comments from the floor, from Alan. It is really honest and pragmatic presentation, John. And yeah, you've got Dr. Shazieh as well, saying that she loved the presentation. Now, I had some questions of my own, but I'm going to go straight to the floor because I can see they're coming in thick and fast. So why don't I start addressing them to you to make sure as many questions gets answered as possible, okay? So the very first one is from Sen Blends. Excuse me, I'm curious to hear your view on flavored teas being included in the specialty category. I personally feel specialty tea is about the discovery of natural flavors, the overall experience transmitted from the brews, the appreciation of farmers, etc., an overall unique product of a high quality. What do you have to say about that, John?
It's an interesting question because I think we've got to look at as tea traders particularly, whose product is it? So I don't think, as I said at the very beginning about specialty tea, my personal passion about tea is all about meeting people exactly right, the farmers, the culture, all the work that goes into it. But making flavored blends from scratch is also a skill. It's just that it's not seen as much of a skill because most of what is seen through the market is bought in mass from big manufacturers. I think that you could apply the idea of specialty to flavored blends through the skill that is required. There's a lot of skill required to blend flavorings and blend bases and flowers and fruit to make something which actually tastes nice. It's not just a case of taking anything and throwing flavor on it, and then there you've got a tea. So we have to look also in terms of the wider sense of where the market is sitting right now as well, particularly with the public's understanding of what tea is. And I think if we close ourselves off too much to the idea that specialty tea is about the growers and the single estates and that kind of stuff, then we are in danger of alienating our wider audience that we could that we could then open up, because you have to understand that some person who drinks a loose leaf flavored tea, it's better than drinking a rubbish tea bag. They might then be more open to the idea of having a loose leaf tea of something single estate in a teapot loose leaf to try then. So it's kind of like a gateway drug, gateway tea to get into the good stuff. And I think that is that's really really important. So yes, I completely get, but at the same time, I kind of want to open up a bit.
I think that's very well said. As long as the blend contains good quality ingredients that is sourced well, and yes, understanding where your tea drinker is in their journey is important as well to get them on board. Okay, so next question. Now, this is from an anonymous attendee who's a little bit shy, but has 3 questions. So I'm gonna just list them one by one so it is not confusing, okay? So first question is, why is the total demand for tea decreasing?
Okay, so that's an interesting thing. I don't have a complete answer to that. I think one of the reasons, and I will be quite brutal in my answer on this, is that the big tea companies are not working properly with the industry as a whole to try and grow it. If you look at the way that coffee worked, I know we had Friends back in the 90s and we had the coffee shops and all this kind of stuff, and that kind of got into people's psyches about drinking coffee and making it cool and trendy. But Starbucks, Costa, Nero's and Nestle embraced the idea of high-end specialty tea alongside their commodity products as well. And they didn't balk at the idea of awards and training and standards in coffee. In tea, the big companies want to shut everyone out. And it's horrendous to see how this is going on. They do it through ethical accreditations, which are closed. They do it through trading, which is closed. They do it through ownership of the marketing and the knowledge. And until we can actually get them to embrace this and help us open the market up to people, then it's going to just keep shrinking. This is why small companies like us, when you stop fighting each other for each other's customers and start working together to try and expand it.
Well said. Okay, next question. What does brutal force marketing exactly mean? And is there a good success rate?
Brute force marketing is when you have millions of pounds to just keep pumping into your marketing and advertising to make sure that you completely corner every aspect of social media, television, print, hospitality. You can give your tea away to get it into places. You don't have to make a profit on it. You just have it already there. Twinings has been established as a brand for 200 odd years, so they're absolutely fine. Teapigs is owned by Tata Global Beverages. How can you compete against the company which has an endless marketing budget when you are small and have maybe £2,000 or £3,000 to spend on advertising? So that's what I mean by brute force marketing.
Thank you. And last question from this anonymous attendee is, what would be the optimal number for a range of tea SKUs?
That's a very, very interesting question. It depends what market you're going into. So if you want to be very niche, then if you want to be very niche and you have a really good story about yourself and your brand and your sourcing and everything, you can get away with maybe 4 or 5. If you're going to be more generalized with what you're doing, and particularly if you want to sell into hospitality, you've got to have a range of at least 12 to 15 different ones. You might not sell every single one to each customer, but you've got to have a bit of choice. And unfortunately, what is expected, as I said, is breakfast, Earl Grey, decaf, green, flavored green, rooibos, chamomile, fruit, etc., etc. So yeah, anywhere between 10 to 15. I think it's very difficult to get by with less than that.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, so Dr. Shazieh has the next question for you. It says, thank you, John, for sharing your views from an objective point of view. I'm curious as to the role of tea stories in the UK specialty tea market. Can you say that stories are decisive in customer satisfaction? Absolutely.
Telling your story is the most fundamental, basic thing of being successful in tea. I can give you some examples. We do blending, and my examples are through the blending, but I can also do this with single estate things as well. If you think back to the history of the tea industry, the tea industry in Sri Lanka was pioneered, set up, run by Scottish people, same all over the world in some ways, but then you have the East India Company, you have all the different things that happen with the history of it. And if you have a client who comes to you and wants to do something about their product, then you can tell a story through the naming of the tea estate, for example, or the history of it and how it relates to that. So I have a tea blend which I made for the Caledonian Hotel, which was the old Caledonian terminus for the railway station. We told the story of putting some lapsang in it. It told the story of it being about the coal being transported. We put some whiskey in it. We put some flowers in it. Some silly things like some blue petals reflected the saltire in Scotland. So you can kind of build up a story, and immediately you have immediate customer satisfaction because they buy into this. But then when it comes to other things like single estate teas, telling the story of the grower, your personal relationship with the grower. This is why it's so important to do your research and really spend your time doing your sourcing. Because if you can tell their relationship about how you know the person, what goes into it and all this kind of stuff, immediately customer satisfaction rockets. They feel like they've got a stake in the product. It's not just any old product off the shelf.
Yeah, definitely well said. I think we're more likely to remember and have an emotional connection with something when there is a story rather than facts, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Okay, so next question is from Nigel Milligan. Thank you. Great presentation, John. Nice graphics and a strong message. Now, how far do you rate certified organic as a credible USP? And looking ahead, how effective will organic USP be in the UK specialty tea market in 10 years from now?
That's a really interesting question, because if the public end user knew about the corruption within the organic certification system, then they would probably switch off to it overnight. But the problem is that it's another thing with ethical tick boxing. Unfortunately, we have a situation where the general public think immediately that organic means the be all and end all. So if you're wanting to increase your prices and you're wanting to get more of a foothold, organic is something that you should probably look at as a tea company. Yes, it's a difficult one, because this goes to the heart of organic farming across not just tea, I mean, across the board. I give you a bit of disclosure. My father worked in the Scottish Agricultural Science Agency as a seed tester and was heavily involved in organic testing of potatoes and also genetic modified stuff as well. So he had a very strong viewpoint of exactly this whole kind of thing. But I also, about the food systems and ecosystems as well. But I also know that organic becomes a catch-all for absolving yourself from having to have any further scrutiny within marketing. So it's going to be very important within marketing, whether it is ethical or not. That is another question. And I think Nigel and I could probably have endless conversations about it and about the positives and negatives of it, and how it's used and how it's abused in some ways as a way to kind of sell more product.
We can always count on Nigel for interesting questions. And here's another one, by the way. So also from Nigel, John, do you think the selling off of Unilever's vast tea empire to a hedge fund will ultimately be good for specialty tea?
No. No, I think it needs to be broken up. I think Unilever had a base level of moral compass. If it's into a hedge fund, they are going to be holding purely to their shareholders, which means that I personally think that the message is going to be diluted further and further and further and further. Although Unilever sold their entire industry to get out of what was a bit of a sticky situation with some of the stuff that's going on in the wider tea industry, places like Kenya and further afield as well. So, yeah, I do not believe. No, I think the tea industry needs to be broken up into smaller pieces.
Okay. Yeah, it's wait to be seen. Thank you very much for that. Okay, so next one is from Andrew Maguire. And he says, I have had the privilege of meeting only encouraging and great tea producers and blenders. Do you think this is a strength of the specialty tea space, that most do see the benefit of not having an unhealthy competition? In other words, do you think all small tea producers benefit because more people get to experience quality tea, and this increases the public's perception of what good tea is.
Trying to understand the question a little bit.
Do you think this is a strength of the specialty tea space, that most do see the benefit of not having an unhealthy competition? In other words, do you think all small tea producers benefit because more people get to experience quality tea, and this increases the public's expectations of what good tea is?
So the unhealthy competition, I don't completely understand what that means in terms, but I do think that specialty tea, I'm assuming he's meaning growers, like who are making small batch teas and then they're selling into the tea industry, and then it's being sold on. I think I think the small growers will benefit, but there has to be more transparency. So I mean, to give you an example of company, I mean, I speak to some of the people. I speak to some of the people I buy from. So a good example is the Gopal Rohini tea estates in Darjeeling. They were one of the first of the Darjeeling tea estates to be able to sell a kilo at a time to tea companies around the world, and of different batches, and to pioneer different things. And I have a lot of respect for Rishi, who does a lot of the marketing there. And I went out to see them in 2016. But the trouble is that when there becomes a situation where there's the specialty tea companies in the UK particularly, because the market is not growing at the speed it should be growing, start to try and own a particular tea estate or own a particular brand, and don't really kind of share this as a wider thing, then eventually it collapses in on itself. So I'm trying to understand the question a little bit, but I think the more access that public have to these specialty teas for the growers is great, but then us as traders have a responsibility to be full disclosure about the fact that we are selling this, maybe the same tea as the person down the road from the same tea estate, but what we give as added value is our expertise, our knowledge, our customer service, and this kind of stuff. But if we start changing the narrative on our websites, particularly it's on online trading, to say things like 30% of what we've sold goes back to the grower, or and there are some who are guilty of this, or lowering the price point so much that others who have staff and living wage and this kind of stuff can't compete with the same product, and it becomes a price war. We have to kind of have this debate about what is okay. We shouldn't be doing this to try and undermine each other. And I think there's a bit of a problem where specialty tea traders in the UK, particularly at the minute, have been in the habit of trying to undermine each other. And then ultimately the growers themselves, the tea belongs to the growers, not to us. They should get the exposure. We shouldn't be owning that for them. I hope that kind of answers the question.
I hope that answers. Yes.
I don't know. I mean, I think I kind of understood the question, but.
Yes, Andrew says, I see in the chat, says, sorry, I was trying to type the question quickly. So Andrew, I hope that answers your question. Well, because we've run out of time now, let me just ask you one last question. This is from Alan. Oh, by the way, Andrew says great answer. Okay, so this is from Alan Pirrett. Is the industry for high quality tea undermined by low quality whole tea brands selling poor or cheap average tea? Surely we need a benchmark for quality, like coffee, 85 points, is specialty, for example.
I sit on the fence with this, actually, because I think it's a very dangerous place to be, to start discrediting or slagging off or looking down our noses at the likes of your Tetleys and your PG Tips and that kind of stuff that you can get from the supermarket. Because actually, if you look at what these products are and what's in them, they are very good for what they are for the price point that they're selling at, but they are a completely different product. And I think, going back to the original thing that I was saying at the very beginning about the commercial aspect of what is specialty tea, and I want to include in my definition herbal infusions and flavored teas as well. But I also have my breakfast blend in my company is a CTC blend. It's a high grade CTC blend, but it's still a CTC blend. So if you were to take that kind of thing about percentage points then my breakfast blend would probably fall outside of the specialty tea definition. And so this is difficult. It's so difficult because my CTC blend is very good, and it's a CTC blend on purpose because it infuses strong and gives you a good flavor. So I think it's not black and white with tea, and I think we need to maybe get out of the habit of trying to discredit what isn't specialty tea and actually just talking up more what we do, which is different. Let's give a positive message rather than a negative message.
Well said. John, thank you very, very much, for that presentation. All of us, I'm sure I speak for everybody, enjoyed it thoroughly. And I'm sure if anyone has questions, you'd welcome them, perhaps if they can email you. So yeah, thank you very, very much for your time and for sharing your insights. Now, I just wanted to let everybody know that the next webinar is on the 30th of November, and it's by Dr. Shazieh Ilgaz. Dr. Shazieh is our a very new director on our ESTER board, and she's also part of the research team at the European Specialty Association. And on the 30th of November, she'll be exploring the Turkish tea industry. Now, Turkey is the country which has the highest tea consumption per capita in the world. A fact if you didn't know. Turkey is also the 5th largest tea producer with 287,000 tons of production, and she will be taking us on a journey to see what's happening in Turkey and the opportunity for Turkish specialty tea. So I just also wanted to remind everyone that, ESTER exists to raise the standards of tea everywhere. And we do this by embracing innovation, sharing knowledge, and encouraging collaborations. And our aim is to improve every cup of tea served and to make sure producers get a fair price for their efforts to make better tea. We're a not-for-profit organization consisting of wonderful volunteers all around the world to help bring you content, education programs, and event. And to do this, we rely on membership. So if you're not a member yet, we'd love to have you part of us to help us drive this mission together. So please do find out more about us if you don't know us already at specialtyteaeurope.org. All right, well, I have to say thank you everyone for staying with us tonight and to staying right till the end of this webinar. I hope you got to hear, all of John's good tips. And if you have any other questions, please do email us or send John an email as well. But I'll have to say thank you very much, John, and good night. And thank you to everyone here. We hope to see you on the 30th of November. For now, night, everybody. Thanks, John. Thank you very, very much. Bye.